Welcome back to Desk Careers. I am so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are meeting with Sid Wahi, who is the Executive Director at Africa Business News. I'm so excited to meet you today, Sid. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Maria, for having me on your program.
Let's go on a journey to the younger years, Sid. Take me through what it was like to be a younger Sid around the ages of 15 or 16 when you were thinking about, well, what am I going to do when I graduate from secondary school?
Yeah. So I think if we go back maybe a few years before then, growing up as a kid, I was fascinated with airplanes. So my true passion was to actually become a pilot. And my dad was in the military, so becoming a fighter pilot was something that I wanted to do growing up. But as the years kind of went on, I developed a keen interest in technology. So everything from sort of the hardware side of putting computers together to writing code and that sort of thing. I kind of just followed that in my spare time, and I was at the crossroads because the programs and curriculum that I was taking in my final years of high school and then in university was more on the business, finance, economics, and commerce side. That was largely because I was guided to do so by my dad, who he always said that following the flow of money is the most important thing, and you should understand how businesses work, and you could hire the skills you need from an operations point of view. So I kind of just moved away from the tech side and then focused on business and finance, and that's what led me to choosing a business degree for my undergraduate program.
Brilliant. It sounds to me like not only did you discover, but you also had a really strong role model. So tell us about the relationship that you had with your dad, because I know lots of young people think the answers exist outside. They exist somewhere far away with somebody that they probably don't know, but you're talking about your mentor being your father. How did he guide you and support you? Was it a conversation that was planned, or did it happen to be several conversations over a certain amount of time?
It was definitely several conversations over a long period of time. My dad is so we're part of a business family, first generation business family. So I think from the early years, he was always kind of molding me into what he thought I should be doing. So it was a series of conversations, and like I mentioned, the anecdote about the flow of money and understanding how finance works. That was just one conversation in a series of conversations we had about kind of like ambitions and aspirations that I need to have. Now, it wasn't an iron fist that he sort of ruled with. It was a strong nudging in certain directions. It just so happened that I do have a flair for numbers, and money was a subject I excelled at even in grade two. So when I did take my first few finance courses, I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with how business models are put together, and just how an organization works, and just everything that sort of goes into running a business. And it turned out to be good advice, and I'm glad that I followed it.
And in thinking about that, being younger and thinking about young people today, what kind of advice should a young person be listening to when they're thinking about gaining knowledge from mentors? How do they choose a mentor if they're not as lucky as you were having such a great one at home?
So I think that there are a number of different tracks, and unfortunately, a lot of these tracks are made available to you once you graduate and you start working. So, for instance, if you work at a professional services firm or consulting or accounting, they tend to have programs internally that allow you to bond with a mentor and then and kind of just get guidance from them. But in the event that you don't have that, we live in a world today, or in the event that you don't go down that track, we live in a world today where we're super connected through social media and LinkedIn. And my experience generally has been that when you reach out to people with a genuine interest in something, they wouldn't shy away from sharing some knowledge with you. Particularly successful businessmen and women, I think they have this innate need to want to share, again, give back. So I would say don't be shy of just reaching out to somebody. I know one of the big things that I was terrible at doing when I was growing up. I was very shy. didn't have a lot of self-confidence. So I felt very self-conscious of approaching anybody and asking them for anything. Even to ask someone for an internship, I just felt weird about asking somebody. But my advice would be that if you don't ask, you won't get, and you really have nothing to lose by asking.
And such an important skill to learn, would you say, in the world of business today? If you don't ask, you don't get. You can almost get left behind on that really busy pathway of business people and people just trying to get to their next adventure. What are some of the strategies that you use today to make sure that you're staying current in that networking and being able to still ask when you need help?
Yeah, so one of the phrases that people throw around is, and as much as I hate it, it's true. Your net worth is your network. So it's incredibly important to have your spheres of influence around you. And I mentioned LinkedIn and social media as being one way to access people, but there are a lot of organizations, youth organizations. There's organizations that as you progress in your career, you can be a part of, and they organize events and mixers. A lot of them are free. A lot of them are accessible virtually. So my advice would be, put yourself out there and don't be shy. Don't stay at home and think that you're gonna get somewhere. So go out and meet people. One of the things I tell people is that I never turn down a meeting. It doesn't matter what the agenda is or whatever, or whether something may come out of it or not, because you don't know until you try. And those unknowns are just kind of there until you actually sit down and have a conversation with somebody. And one of the things that I've noticed in business is that you sit down with somebody to talk about one thing, but then it leads to something else, and there's an opportunity to collaborate, and it just unfolds organically.
Fantastic. All right. I'm looking at the logo on your polo shirt and I'm thinking about Africa Business News. I know that you guys are in the business of news. You are a news company. You operate TV, print, and digital, including CNBC Africa and Forbes Africa. What is that like to be working for an enterprise doing business news, and not just any kind of business news? I mean, you guys are known all over the world. What's that like, and what should a young person strive for if this is what they want to be doing?
Well, I'll start by saying that as a young person, don't be shy from following the news. The news is not boring. The news is interesting. It's going to hold you well in your future if you start early. Watch CNBC, read Forbes, pick up the Financial Times, read The Economist, not cover to cover, just anything that tickles your fancy. It's good to start early. So in terms of Africa Business News, CNBC and Forbes, so we are a franchise of the international, largely the American brands. And we run a localized African version. So we have our headquarters in South Africa with bureaus in Nigeria, Rwanda, and Kenya. And we produce about 8 hours of live business content from sub-Saharan Africa. That's on the TV side. And we put together a bi-monthly business magazine with largely content that we produce ourselves, with a little bit of international content we get from Forbes. And that's been sort of our business model. What's been really interesting, or what I love the most about being in this news business, is that it's incredibly dynamic. The challenges that I face on a daily basis are completely different. No 2 days are alike. Every day there's something that goes wrong, and therefore there's an opportunity to fix it. The learning is just incredible. And just to tie into what we were talking about earlier about networking and meeting people, being in a news organization, one of the things I end up doing is going to a lot of conferences and events. At age 23, I was part of the media team to go to Davos, and I've been to Davos 7 times with the World Economic Forum, and I was incredibly lucky to do that. But this gave me an opportunity to network and just see how these things are put together from the back end, but then also kind of just see global events unfold right before my eyes. And I think it's incredibly amazing and powerful. In terms of advice for young people, let's say you do want to pursue a career in journalism, whether it be print or television or digital. The first piece of advice I would give you is that don't box yourself in as one type of journalist. So don't say that you're TV presenter, and that's what you're going to do. We live in a omni-channel world, so you do need to be able to produce, write, script write. Presenting is a skill I think everybody needs to have, particularly just being able to articulate yourself well. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. The second is that we find it very challenging to find good financial journalists, because that as a skill set doesn't really exist on a pan-African level. So what I would suggest is that either be a master at the finance and the business side of things, and then train and become a financial journalist, or become the best journalist you can be, and then learn the finance later, because it's very rare that you find a course or a program or curriculum that is suited to both. And then the second thing is, and then sort of the second thing is that the internet has a wealth of knowledge, and even if your primary course or curriculum doesn't include financial journalism, you could be a journalist and still learn the finance side. There's so many free resources online, like Investopedia and things like that you can just use, and you don't need a degree for it, is what I'm trying to say.
I love that you're saying that you don't need a degree. You can still develop yourself. I think that's one of the concerns young people have when they are in secondary school, is making the right choice, or what they feel will be the right choice. So many opinions coming from different angles for them. But hearing you say, you know what, it's not always about that degree. You can develop yourself even online. What do you look for in young talent at Africa Business News?
So I think the way that I want to answer this is just kind of tell you a little bit about what we look for in our space, but then also what we generally hear people saying. Fortunate enough to get a lot of data from a lot of chief executives across Africa, and they have certain frustrations that I'd like to share as well. So we are looking for people that are loyal and have the right attitude. That's the most important thing. If you don't have the right attitude, then it's a losing battle from the onset. In terms of technical skills, we are happy to train people. You never typically find somebody who can do 100% of the job that you need them to do. So if you find that they can do 51% and they have the right attitude, then I think it's something that you can absolutely work with and build. And that's specifically towards fresh graduates and young people. We don't expect you to have a killer CV or have tons of work experience. In fact, most of the things people list are just useless anyway. We don't care if you're president of the chess club. It doesn't help me in financial journalism. And then in terms of what generally people say about new graduates, and I remember having lunch with somebody who's the CEO of a big logistics company across Africa, and they were telling me about a new warehouse project they launched in Ghana. And the biggest challenge is that whenever they hire somebody on the vocational side, so people who have technical expertise in running forklifts and whatever else that you need to have in running a warehouse, they spend upwards of $50,000 over 2 years just retraining them, because the quality of the education they received has just not been up to scratch, and it's not current with what they need to know. So my takeaway from that is that don't rely on your curriculum that you might be studying. You have to be passionate about what you're doing, and you need to be consistently and constantly curious, and keep upskilling yourself and remain current with whatever it is that you are doing or interested in doing.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much. Let's go into your personal highlights. I know one of your highlights is that you did a big business restructuring that cut 50% of the costs. So watching this right now will be economics and business students as well as other students. Tell us how you did that, and I mean, how does that even look in your perspective?
Right. So media has gone through a crazy evolution over the last 14, 15 years. When we launched CNBC Africa in 2007, it was 3 years before the financial crisis. Oh, sorry, it was a year before the financial crisis. And then 3 years was sort of when things were just recovering. When we launched Forbes, it was just when the financial crisis, again, it was recovering. At the same time, the iPhone had now become ubiquitous. Everybody was, consuming content, not on a television screen or in a magazine, but on their mobile device. And that's just kind of exploded over the last couple of years. So when we set up this expensive TV infrastructure, with studios and cameras and satellite connectivity, we were preparing ourselves for a television world where you needed all of this, not knowing very clearly at that time that this shift was going to happen sooner than anticipated. So we started seeing pressure on the business because our costs were more than the revenue we were getting from advertisers. So we found ourselves in a situation that if we did not adapt to change, we would soon, find ourselves locking up our doors. So what I had done with the assistance of the team, and one of the most important things you need to have when you undertake a project like this is buy-in from the people around you, because it impacts them. The job losses, there's changes in the way that you operate. For instance, our senior team had office cabins. After the restructuring, everybody was in open plan. So you imagine the head of a news station who's enjoyed having a massive office now has to sit next to his junior reporter, his or her junior reporter. So there's a big change, but the way in which I kind of looked at it was just understanding every process in the granular detail, that in the most granular detail that I could. So how does video packs that form part of an interview, how does that get put together? What is the technology that we're using? For instance, we had a massive monthly expense on satellites and satellite transponders that we didn't need to use because internet had become fast enough that we can now do videos over Zoom and Skype and certain specialized equipment that we use in broadcast, but over the internet and not necessarily through expensive satellite. So it was just looking at things like that. We had 5 cameras in the studio, in one of our studios with 5 camera operators. We replaced that with robotic cameras. We started hiring people that were able to do more than one thing. So we didn't have, let's say, a dedicated scriptwriter anymore, but that was part of, the producer's job going forward. So if I had to summarize it, it was really, part of it was just process re-engineering, and part of it was embracing new technology to replace the old and expensive.
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how popular was Sid during that time? I mean, how do you, because surely in you're wearing 2 hats in a moment like this. And I think it's important for young people to understand when you are brought into an organization to find more efficient ways to save costs and keep the organization sustainable, that they will wear 2 hats. One is the business and keeping the business thriving. But the other hat is you're still Sid, you're still a person, and you're having to deal with your colleagues who are also people that have responsibilities and lives. How do you divide those 2 hats so that it doesn't feel personal, but at the same time, you're ethical in creating these opportunities?
That's a tough one because I think the hardest part of this exercise was change management and the human side of it. At the end of the day, when you do business, you don't do business between 2 inanimate objects. It's with 2 people, whether it's a client, vendor, or even your colleagues. So one of the things I spoke about was getting buy-in, and even though a lot of the ideation was mine, the execution was done by people who are near and dear to me in the organization, and people I got on my side, my team, so to speak. And we shared the workload together, and we had a unified front with everybody else in terms of the outside world, and said, look, guys, we need to do this, and it's part of our survival. So I don't really think I've answered your question, but what I will say is that it was very difficult.
It is, and it's not something you learn at university in a classroom. It's something that life teaches you, would you say, along that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be very unpopular with a lot of universities to say that, anything that you learn in a classroom, you could teach yourself because you have access to that knowledge. What you can't learn, though, is interpersonal skills. You can't learn that reading something on a computer. You have to practice that with human beings. And that's where, that's why I'm a big fan of the case method. I'm a big fan of presentations and collaboration and group work. And that's where you can learn these sort of things. At the end of the day, you don't work as an individual, you work as part of a team. That's how you learn these things, is by doing.
I completely agree. Let's move on to another exciting highlight that you mentioned. It's in meeting influential people across the globe. Tell us what that's like, because that would really be one of the perks to the many perks that you would experience in a career that you're enjoying. But what's it like when you're actually meeting an influential person that you have read about or heard about, but now you've actually met them in person?
You know what? I think it's humanizing. They are fallible, just like the rest of us. They're human beings. They're not superhumans. And I don't want to sound like I'm name dropping at all, but I've met maybe 10 heads of state, all 3 South African presidents. I've met Bono, Will.i.am, people just in if they don't know me, of course, but the people that you've met at conferences. And I had this amazing chat with Will.i.am about this AI thing that he was launching, and he just it was 2 nerds geeking out over technology. We just spoke about the technology stack that he was using in building his app, and it was great to have that sort of thing. So they're just human beings like the rest of us. That's ultimately it.
And in remembering, or maybe when you meet them and thinking, oh, maybe we wrote something in the news about this person, because I think sometimes we forget we're actually writing about a real person, and what we're writing about and making public is actually their personal vulnerabilities. What's that like when you're meeting them and you think, ouch, that I wonder how that landed for them when this came out?
Yeah. So I think from that point of view, we're very fortunate to be in a genre that is very fact-based. So when you're talking about business and companies and economics, you typically get to talk about numbers and very objective things. So it's rare that you would talk about somebody's character or something that would make for an awkward conversation. But in having said that, there's a clear line between church and state, and I don't sit on the editorial side. I'm not a journalist. I'm on the business side. So if I did find myself in an awkward situation, I'd just blame it on my editorial team. Say, well, those guys run the newsroom. We got nothing to do with that. That's actually how it is. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Okay, let's talk about this thought that you have about grades not being everything, and enjoy the stages. That's a tricky one for young people, especially when they're coming to the end of secondary school. Teachers are reminding them about grades. Universities require grades for entrance. There's such a focus on getting into those high-ranking universities, and that's really all about getting those grades. But here you are in the industry, and you've just said we're actually looking for talent, and it's not about what you're learning in a classroom, it's more about what you can bring to the organization. So how do you enjoy the stages, get into the universities that everyone is promoting, but remembering that in industry it's not about the grade?
So let me start by talking about getting into university. Now it's very easy to pass judgment and make a comment on something when I've done the opposite and I've gone on the traditional track, which was go to a good university and then and then get a job. But what I would say to people is that, look, if you don't get the grades and you don't get into the university of choice or into university at all, it's not the end of the world, because again, we live in a world that has become incredibly democratized because of the internet. I've seen young people build, especially as a result of this pandemic, COVID-19, people have built side hustles. They've built, everybody's talking about NFTs now. I mean, there's something that, you could sit in your bedroom and put together and create a business out of it. There was a 12-year-old kid in the UK who's made a 6-figure income by selling these programmatically generated pixel whales. So there are opportunities. There are opportunities even in places like Nigeria or India or Ghana, where where people might say, well, what about us? We don't really live in the digital age. And I would disagree. In fact, you do. And I would say there's an entrepreneurial spirit that you need to tap into and look into that sort of thing. Let's say, for instance, let's say that university is a means to an end, and the end is getting a job with a particular company. Rather than worrying about getting grades, focus on solving a problem for that company, and then see if a manager picks up on it and says, "Hey, I like what you did here. Why don't you come work for us?" In fact, big technology companies like Twitter and Microsoft, maybe not Microsoft, but Twitter and Google have definitely come out and said, "We don't need you to have a university degree to get a job with us." So I would say, if don't sweat it, because if you don't get in on the first round, there is always another path. It's not the end of the world. In terms of enjoying the stages, again, I come from privilege, so it's easier for me to say this. But even if you don't, what I would say is that the amount of responsibility that you have as a human being only increases with time. It doesn't decrease. So if you're in a rush to go from sixth form or grade 12 or whatever to university and then get a job and then just get to the end of the race, you're not going to enjoy any moment of it. So try and take time out to do something that you enjoy. I used to play a lot of team sports when I was younger. I don't do that anymore, but I wish I'd spent more time doing that in my youth. So if you play football or cricket or something, just go out and do more of that, because you're not going to get that time back. You're going to be 33 years old with 2 dogs and a 3-month-old baby, and and your life just grows from there.
That felt a little real.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sid. It's been so much fun listening to you. Such a wealth of information that you're sharing with young people. If I had to take you back, would you do it all again?
I would do everything. I would do it all again. I don't think I would change anything. I like the way that my journey panned out. The one thing I may have done differently is I've been passionate about technology and writing code and computer science, and I didn't really follow that after high school. I would have just gone back and to my 17-year-old self and said, "Listen, just keep up with it, because that's the way that the world is going to go." So,
fantastic. Thank you so much, Sid. And that brings us to the end of another incredible conversation. It was such a pleasure talking with Sid Wahi, who is the Executive Director at Africa Business News. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you at the next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight.